Tonight's topic for discussion is apologetics in evangelism. And with me is my good friend and evangelist, Frank Franz.
Wow.
Glad to have you, Frank.
Yeah, thanks.
So
Thanks for having me.
apologetics is primarily a theoretical discipline to strengthen and defend our faith, to know and trust God through the justification of Christianity's truth claims. I think that would be a good definition of what apologetics is. It's defending what we all believe as Christians. And I think there are at least four main purposes to Christian apologetics. Obedience, for one. We're told to do it, right?
Mhm.
1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to give a reasoned defense for the hope that you have. Another one would be worship. It's an expression of loving God with all our heart, soul, and our minds too. Evangelism, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, bringing the truth of the Christian faith to unbelievers. And fourth, and this is one that people don't often think about, it helps to strengthen believers. My faith is stronger. I'm not a Christian because of apologetics, but I'm a stronger Christian.
Yeah.
Through argument and evidence. It makes sense. You know, ours is not an unreasonable faith. We have a reasonable faith. So Christian apologetics can be divided into two kinds: offensive and defensive. And when I say offensive, I don't mean, although you do offend people.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're making
Not
a
on purpose.
positive case for Christianity. That's offensive. And the defensive would be you're defending the truth claims of Christianity against somebody who might have a problem with it.
Yeah.
So there's both the offensive and defensive, and you probably deal with both of those. But maybe you start off with offensive and then you go to defensive, and however
you try to start a conversation. Most of the time it's people, well, especially nowadays, people don't talk to each other even in waiting rooms and stuff anymore. I remember back not too long ago, if you're sitting on a bus or an airplane or waiting room, people would strike up conversations with each other, and that doesn't happen very much anymore. Everyone's on the phone. Right. So a lot of times when you go to talk to people, they're, especially a stranger, they're caught off guard a little bit. So most of our conversations are, we ask them a question, try to get them talking, and give some, what Greg Kokel will say, leaving a stone in the shoe, try to give them something about Christianity or some, depending on how they respond, maybe something to defend the Christian faith, but it hardly ever rarely leads to a gospel presentation, percentage wise. It's a low percentage that leads to a full gospel presentation like you would see with Ray Comfort or something. People don't know that Ray talks to a lot of people before he gets that one conversation, right?
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're planting mostly.
Yeah, a lot of planting and watering. Yeah.
So strictly speaking, apologetics, and this is where a lot of people get confused, apologetics is not evangelism.
Right.
You talk to somebody like Don in a discernment ministry. That's what it is. It's not an apologetic ministry.
Right.
But apologetics is a tool, a powerful tool that he uses and that you use in evangelism. And so, like I said, there are several important purposes for apologetics. Tonight, we're just going to be talking about one, and that's evangelism.
Okay.
So I was going to ask you, and I asked you this already once, but I want you to say it again. How did this ministry start? And I mean, you're a fairly new Christian, and you're on fire for evangelism right now. How did you get started in this ministry?
So I basically got started with it as I got saved about 15 years ago. So 3-4 years in, I started noticing that Christians that I knew didn't talk about their faith at all. And then when I told people that I was a Christian, other people that I didn't know were Christians said that they were a Christian too. And I was like, well, I wish I would have known this.
They were secret Christians.
Yeah. And I was like, I wish I would have known that you believe these things, 20 years ago or 10 years ago, because I would have liked to have known it, you know. So that was some of it. And then I've always been someone to kind of plug in where there isn't as much going on. And I just saw there wasn't as much going on in that world from my perspective, because I just didn't run into very many people that shared their faith. And so I don't know if I'm necessarily gifted for it, like say like a Ray or something, but I saw somewhere to work. When I first got saved, I didn't know where I was going to even do anything. When I first started going to churches, I was like, well, everyone's doing everything. Where am I going to fit in? And then as you get going, you find out that that's not actually the case. There's plenty of work to do. And
so you found a niche.
so yeah, I kind of found a niche there, and I thought it would be good to work there because I didn't see so many people doing it, and then just started going from there.
I think you were called, because not everybody has that personality to do what you.
Yeah, or the desire, right? If the
Or the
desire
desire.
comes there, it's God providentially gives you that.
When we say desire, it almost makes me sound like, if I don't have a desire that you have, maybe I'm not that concerned about people's salvation.
Or an interest, say.
Yeah,
But you are. I mean, other people
Oh, I
are.
know.
You just have a different ministry.
yes.
Yeah.
exactly.
So how important do you think apologetics is in evangelism? And you've mentioned Ray Comfort. Do you see anybody as a role model that you would look up to for sharing the gospel? How important is apologetics?
So first, apologetics, I think, is very important. I don't know if you could do evangelism, especially nowadays, without apologetics. Well, even Apostle Paul used apologetics, both evidential and presuppositional,
Mhm.
in the book of Acts when he was going to different areas.
Mhm.
So it's always been around, and it's always been neat. All the church fathers used it. So there was always the defense of the faith. So
Well, Jesus
It's-
is always.
yeah, so it was super important. And then today there's just as many doubters as there were back then,
Right.
you know. So I don't think you could do evangelism without apologetics. I don't think it would be effective.
And is there anybody that you like their style?
Well, yeah, everyone has their different personality.
Right.
I like Ray's heart. I like Ray's, he puts a plan together and follows it. I
Mhm.
like his motivation. I like Todd Friel. He'll go out and talk to kids on college campuses and just interview them and talk to them. I like that. So those two are the well-known evangelists that I like. But there's even like Jeff Durbin that's on Apologia Studios and all that. He goes out and talks to Mormons and everything. And I like those approaches where you're just out talking to people. And then I have done some open air preaching and learned with Ray some of that. And there's aspects about that I like too. It's just a
For
little
somebody
hard to
who's not
organize.
familiar with that term, what does that mean? Open air preaching.
Open air preaching is when you, in Ray's case, you draw a crowd and you're standing on an elevated platform or a box or something to kind of get noticed and to get your voice to carry. And as you're in public.
And
You're
just
publicly. Yeah, some people just read the Bible. Some people will use trivia and everything to try to get people interested in a conversation.
Mhm.
Some people just start preaching the gospel. There's different approaches to that as well.
D.L. Louis was great for doing that.
Who?
D.L. Louis.
Yeah, and Whitfield, all those guys. It was actually, that's been around forever too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've already touched on evidential and presuppositional, and then there's this idea of classical apologetics or evangelism. And there's been a lot of books written on that. The way I understand it is classical and evidential are similar, where evidential you might not even use natural law, like an argument for the existence of God through, say, cosmology or something like that. You would go right to the resurrection,
Yeah.
And then in presuppositional, you presuppose, kind of the way Paul did when he was talking to the Jewish listeners.
Yeah.
Their understanding and acceptance of the Jewish scriptures.
Right. They
So-
had a standard to go off.
Right. Is that something you think about when you're preaching?
So
Evangelizing?
loosely. So I have a kind of like a little framework that I go with.
Okay.
So most people, or say like I was passing out Bibles with the Gideons
Mhm.
last summer, and an atheist fellow came over from the atheist group that's there. And so he starts demanding evidence. So I always start off with almost everybody evidentially.
Okay.
And then as the conversation carries on, then I start getting into the presuppositional stuff, meaning where's your standard from? So atheist, when you say that something's bad, by what standard?
And that would also be the classical approach too. The moral law.
Yeah, the moral law. Yeah. But presupposing, meaning that I have a standard I'm going to go back to. I presuppose that this Bible is
Okay.
God's word, and
Right.
what he says is, when he says something is good, I agree with it, that it's good. If he says something's bad, I agree with it, it's bad. The atheist, for example, doesn't have that
Right.
standard to go off. If he says something's bad, but why is it bad?
Right.
Who says?
Right.
So I always kind of weave them together.
Yeah, that's a blended approach.
Yeah.
Sounds like.
Yeah.
I think that's really healthy.
Yeah, and because some people are asking for evidence because they actually really do have a real question.
Right.
You know, it's actually a stumbling block for them. It's not just a challenge. You know, sometimes you do get someone that's just challenging, and that's why it ends up getting to the presuppositional then, because once I start realizing that the questions aren't in interest, or because they really have been wondering about this entire lives, then I start getting to the presuppositional, where you start kind of hammering back with, and I mean hammering because in atheists and stuff, they can get a little bit more tense and
Defensive.
defensive. Yeah. So you kind of, the presuppositional lends to that.
You feel like they sometimes look for an argument?
Oh yeah. They think that they're right,
Right.
and we think we're right. So I mean, I have no problem with them defending their. I actually didn't mind it at all. It was kind of nice for someone to approach me, you know, instead of having to go be the one the other way around, you know. But so yeah. So I use both, and then I use that framework.
You think it's a good idea to, if you don't have a challenge like that right off the bat, to start asking questions to kind of get the lay of the land and see where this person is?
Yeah. So what we usually do, the one that usually gets people talking, is you just ask someone, we'll say something like, we're just walking around the park today, and we're talking to people, and we're asking everyone some of the big questions. And today's big question is, what do you think happens when someone dies? And very rarely do you get someone that says, I don't want to answer that or talk about that. Because everybody, I mean, for example, every time they make a movie, a faith movie, or a demon angels movie, or that Tom Hanks movies, right? They're always packed.
Yeah.
You know, Passion of the Christ, all these, right? They're always packed. So people are thinking about these things all the time. And people always have an opinion about that too. You will get some people that are just like, you die and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's, and sometimes they try to brush you off, and that's where it kind of gets into a sense. You try and talk to them a little bit. You got to kind of, you know how it is when you meet somebody, you kind of feel that,
Sure.
Is this person in a position that they're going to give you a conversation, or are they
Mhm.
really aggravated something else and you're there and it's just time to move on? And that's why I like having tracks with me, because a lot of times you can at least give them a track,
Mhm.
And then they'll read it later, hopefully.
So you feel like your questions let them kind of dictate the direction of the conversation?
Yeah.
Let it natural. You don't try to force the gospel on them.
No.
Just let it naturally go.
Yeah. So I rarely get to the gospel, because there's so much in front of it.
Yep.
There's so much baggage. I mean, I'm not kidding. I mean, I've met kids there, and when I say kids, I don't mean 12. I mean 19, 20. They don't know anything about the Bible. This is a Greek culture, speaking from like the book of Acts, a Greek culture, almost worse in some ways because of the godlessness, the Darwinian evolution beliefs, whether everything's materialism.
Mhm.
So, I forgot I was going with that.
Well, when you said that about the track,
Yeah.
I was a Christian maybe 2 years before I ever was approached, and on my car window was a track.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, why didn't somebody tell me this years ago?
Yeah, I know.
Why did I have to find this out by myself?
That's what I mean. Yeah, that's what I mean. And that's what that's what keeps a lot of evangelists going too, I think, because there's some days where it's not every day, not every conversation, not every time you even go out is, what we would consider a victory, I mean, from our vantage point, even though every time you go out and spread God's word and have these conversations, it's a win. I mean, even if you're rejected,
Right.
these are all actually wins in God's economy.
Right.
And we have to remember those things, because there's times that, and there's times it just doesn't work. Like it doesn't go like you think it's going to go. Or there's times where you're not as bold, for whatever reason, you're not as bold. Your words just aren't coming to you like normal, and you stumble around a little bit,
Yeah, that brings up a good point that I was going to raise about Greg Koukl and his book, Tactics.
Yeah.
And his main tactic is to ask questions. It gives you a little bit of breathing room, and you can kind of clarify where the person is, and maybe you misunderstood something they said, and that gives them the opportunity to clear it up, so you're not arguing against a belief that they don't even hold.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And his number one question that he loves to ask is the Columbo question, which is, you remember Columbo, that stumbling,
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Then what do you mean by that?
What do you mean by that?
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you a little time to, figure, and maybe this person you're talking with will direct the conversation where they want to go.
Yeah.
But have you ever read that book?
Yeah, I've read most of Tactics 1, his first printing. And he has a new edition that came out, I think 2 years ago.
Yeah.
That I have on my queue. It's in my stack. But I listen to his podcasts almost every day, and so I'm familiar with a lot of it. I'm still working on internalizing the book. It takes me a little bit to get. He has a list of questions and things. I just have like that. What do you mean by that? And those kind of things are kind of internalized. But he has a lot of really. I mean, it's not a huge book. No, but it's packed with really good information. Yeah,
I like one of the things he says is take it for a test drive. So this person has a worldview. Let's bring it to its logical conclusion. Right. And see if his worldview actually makes sense. Right. So let's take it for a test drive.
Yeah.
He's got a bunch of
He
them.
does. He has a lot of them.
He's got the
taking the roof off.
Yeah.
Different things like that to remember. Yeah, he's very good.
Yeah, he has at least a 3-part series on that book. I think they're like 35 or 40-minute videos where he goes through the book quickly.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, a person doesn't even have to read the book. They can get what he's talking about, like kind of like an overview.
Yeah. And even if they get 3 or 4 things from it, will help tremendously in a conversation.
Yeah. The worst thing we can do is, I think, get angry and defensive, and then you've lost.
Yeah. You're out if you get angry and defensive. The conversation, Ray even talks about that. If I've made them angry, if Ray makes them angry because of his approach or because of something he said that's not scriptural, then he's a lose. Then it was his fault. But if they're angry because you said something that the Bible says, well, then that's on them, right? That's their problem. They're arguing with Jesus now, not with the evangelist.
Right. You stay in the driver's seat as long as he is answering the question.
Right. Yeah.
About what they believe.
Mm-hmm. And so you do try to make sure that you're in the right mode, and you pray about that, and you remember that you're dealing with mostly unbelievers, and so you shouldn't be upset when an unbeliever acts like an unbeliever. Right. I mean, I remember one time when I was in New York, open air preaching with this group. I was in training. It was a training session, and the guy kept showing me a naked woman's body with a monkey face on it the entire time I'm up there. He keeps, it is aggravating, but you can't get mad at it. You can't lose it. You can't lose control of it. You just have to go through it. It was just kind of an immature thing. You just brush it off as that. So I have had people, it's rare. I mean, it's 1 out of 50 or something, where I've had people instantly get angry and, swear, cuss at me. They don't want anything to do with something, with Christianity, something like that. So that does happen occasionally. And sometimes you're just shocked because you didn't think that the person would even go there that fast, you know?
That was my next question. What do you do in a case like that?
So depending, the one guy that got upset when I had first asked him right off the bat, I just asked him why he felt that way. I said, well, I said, well, why? He said, I don't want to talk about no blanking Christianity, you know? And I got a sense that he was equating Christianity with oppression, slavery, kind of this new, well, it's not, I mean, this attack on Christianity, it's a slander, right? It's a slander of Christianity to say that it's the white privileged male religion. You know, the media has been kind of spreading that. And so I got a feeling from this fellow that he had bought into some of that. And so I couldn't get him to talk much, though. He just stopped. I said, well, what do you mean by that question? What, kind of a version of it, why, what about Christianity makes you so upset? What, did something happen? Did the church mistreat you somehow or something like that? And he wouldn't talk.
You think that happens a lot? The church mistreats people and drives them away from Christianity?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of unbiblical churches.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, another thing too is a non-Christian sometimes will judge all Christians by what you said.
Yes, by one person's.
They'll think, now I know what a Christian is and I don't want to have nothing to do with it.
Right.
It could be a well-meaning Christian who shouldn't be an evangelist.
Yeah, you have that.
Or maybe a little too judgmental.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, all the different variations of Christianity, right? Yeah. You go to some churches and you have to, not so, I guess you don't hear about so much anymore today, but not too long ago, if you weren't wearing if the women weren't wearing dresses and the guys weren't wearing the right, it was a problem. So you have those type of things. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, we can be just as pharisaical as the Pharisees, with some things sometimes, with our quick judgments. And
look at the church that parades around gay marriages and
goes to funerals, right? Goes to funerals and
God should kill them. And
holds up signs. That's it is. It's like, where do you guys get that from? And I agree with when they say, God says it's going to happen. Well, I agree with that, but you can't, that's not how you're supposed to say. You're not supposed to, that's hellfire preaching too, where there's no gospel. It's all just law and that's it. It's all, you're going to go to hell. You did something wrong and that's it. And the people don't even know what law they broke and what, they're hearing about a penalty, but they're not hearing the mercy side.
The grace.
The grace. Yeah. And that's important too. And there are times though, like Todd Friel says, there are times where you leave people in law. If you get somebody that's arrogant, very arrogant, sometimes that's all you get is all you'll get through is part of the 10 Commandments, and they'll be upset about it, and you can't get further. When then you leave them there. You can't get them the gospel. Yeah. They're not listening. But the next evangelist or a tract or the radio or something will do the watering on the seeds.
Mm-hmm. So you're just tilling the soil.
Yeah. And Greg talks about that a lot too. That especially today. Gardener. Yeah, the gardening. A lot of not so much just, I remember watching Ray cover videos, and he, of course, he's showing what, the ones that had a conversation and all. Yeah, right. And those are good. I mean, it's important to see the whole thing. And he does have times where it doesn't. He'll have a whole reel of times where it was scary or didn't go so great, things like that. So he does show both sides, but when sometimes you get, because it's YouTube, so sometimes you get in your mind that, all the, it's just a formula, and if I follow this through, it's going to kind of work out, and that's not the case. I mean, you just kind of get used to it because you keep seeing it.
So that can build up a false sense of you're, winning every soul to Christ on every conversation.
Yeah. You can, I mean, if you're not careful, you have to remember, but it's good just to have a conversation. One guy that we used to work with, Ron, he's been doing evangelism for, I think 20-25 years out in the square, out in the public square, talking to people in tracks and things. And he said that one time we just had a night where it was from our standard, it was just, it wasn't, And he says, Frank, we had 30 people that we talked to tonight that are now thinking about their eternity and their life and all these things that even if they thought about it for 30 seconds, they weren't thinking about it before. And some people might go home tonight and think about it where they otherwise wouldn't have, just because we were out here today trying to talk to them. So we can't really, it's very human of us to always have a bar to be like, oh, that was a really good conversation, and then what I think, God's humbled me too. I've had conversations where I was like, wow, this guy this guy's going to be saved. And then he turned out he wasn't. The roots were shallow, and and then other times where you said something what felt like minor and it was really impactful.
The Spirit's got to do it.
Yeah, the Holy Spirit's got to do it. Exactly. Yeah, there's no doing anything outside of the Holy Spirit working, for sure. Yeah.
I learned that hard way.
Yeah.
What kind of person do you most come across while you're witnessing? That we have cultural Christians, there's cult members, atheists, agnostics.
Mhm.
What's the
So, well, it's all for me. It's kind of it's a fairly even mix of cultural Christian.
that somebody was raised in the church but really hasn't made a commitment?
Yeah, and it's very that's pretty common. Of they're not Christians at all. I mean, cultural for right. I mean, cultural Christian meaning they're not Christians. They're not Christians. They're
raised in the church.
Yeah, it's just their name only. Yeah, they're not Christians though. They don't believe in any of the essential doctrines. They
might not even know them.
Right. Yeah, that's very common.
I imagine that in the Roman Catholic faith, you'll find that quite a bit. I was raised Roman Catholic, and it was just something you were, it's like that was on your birth certificate.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So
you
run into
baptized
that
when you're a baby, and I'm a Catholic.
Yeah. And you run the Catholics too, especially in this area. This is a pretty Catholic area.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. And those conversations aren't usually, it's always the moral law for me when I'm first starting with somebody.
Really?
Yeah. It's always, I'm always trying to get to the law.
Okay.
For not exactly right away, 10-minute conversation, 5-minute conversation, whatever it is, 2 minutes, depending on the person. And then you're working towards the law.
Objective morality.
Yeah.
What makes it right and wrong.
Yeah. And just that you want them to know that they're under judgment, that they've broken the law. Okay. And that they're guilty. Mm-hmm. But then you need to get them to the gospel, of course, if you can. Right. And so yeah, so we like when Tony and I are out, we're pretty much going to the law first. Then within the conversation is when the apologetics starts getting used, where people have an objection as you're talking to, especially when you start bringing the law. Mm-hmm. So as you start bringing the law, saying you think you're a good person, yes, okay, let's test it, right? Have you ever told a lie? Sometimes that first question, then you'll get one of the offensive objections, right? Well, if God's so great, why do little kids die? Right. Just like that. It'll come right out of the first, because their conscience is already starting to stricken them of being guilty under God's law. So then they'll start coming that way,
So these people aren't really atheists. They just don't believe in Christianity.
No, so occasionally you get an atheist. Most of the time, it's agnostic, cultural Christian. Yeah, I've had the younger crowd is atheist more so.
Really?
Yeah. So if I know if I go to
so they believe that God does not exist.
Yeah, they'll say that, and then a lot of times you find out that they're actually agnostics. Right. Yeah. So if I go to a group of say 4 or 5 college kids, which is usually that's my favorite group, is to go to, because they're willing to have a conversation because they're still in that.
Because they think they know it all.
Yeah, well, they're still in that youthful mode too, where they're willing to talk and
they'll gang up on you too.
Yeah, right. They like to. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's kind of fun.
And they love to win a conversation.
Yes, exactly. And they so they like to all those things, right?
Love to argue.
Yeah, if there's 3 or 4 of them versus a couple of you, they kind of seem like they have the advantage and all that. So it's but those are usually pretty fun because you can get a pretty good conversation out of those groups. And like I say, they're willing to talk. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times after you get through it, we've had people thank us for a conversation, or we get them one guy that was, he didn't think that science and God connected at all. Yeah. And so we talked to him about that. And we actually, I had a book with me about science and God. that I carry. He took it. He was really interested in reading it, so who knows whatever happened with him,
Sure.
So yeah, it's usually cultural Christian, agnostic, the occasional Catholic. We do run into Mormons and Jehovah's Witness, the ones that are, especially like the Mormons that are out on their, what do they call it when they get the burning in the bosom, they kind of like they're graduating high school and they're going to go on their 2-year evangelism route.
Right.
I can't remember what they call that right now, but you run into those guys.
Really?
Yeah. And you see them. I mean, sometimes we go talk to them on purpose. You see them, they have the white shirt and the badge and all that. So sometimes we'll go engage with them and they're willing to have a conversation too.
Yeah, I bet they are.
Yeah. So for me, I like to talk to a little bit younger, that age demographic. I mean, I think a lot of the evangelists do. I think that's why you see so many that do the college ministries. One is a place of impact because these people are getting into adulthood or they're young adults and growing into more responsibly and all that, and they're really thinking about some of these things. And I think they're trying to catch them when the cement's not all the way hardened. And then Tony likes talking to some of the older people. So it's a good play out because it's not like I won't talk to older people. It's not my comfort zone. I will. I mean, I do, but it's, Tony.
You might be when you're Tony's age.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, right. But Tony's right though. I mean, he'll say like, well, yeah, but they're closer to dying. So they're maybe thinking about, he's been right most of the time, So it's just how we're built. Everyone's built a little different, And so that's why I think especially nowadays, I think it's good to go in teams.
Yeah.
At least one other person. And I wouldn't even think so. We don't do open air preaching. We would like to in the Woodstock Square, but we won't do it without. I would like to have a minimum of 6 people and, up to 10, 12 guys if we were going to do something like that.
Are you thinking that it might get physical or?
Yeah. And once you start open air preaching, there's cameras everywhere.
Is that right?
Yes. People from everywhere will start putting the camera out.
To put on Facebook.
Yeah. To put on Facebook, to all these kind of things. And that's okay. Cause we're not doing anything wrong. And more people are going to hear the message when they post it. So we're okay with cameras, hecklers, all that, because that gets people, that's where the crowd comes from. If someone starts arguing and then this person hears about it, then they get in. And then next thing you know, you can have quite a large crowd, but it's
intimidating.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, it can be a little intimidating sometimes. I had a guy one time when I was in New York. There was a guy, I was standing on a box. It was, I don't know, about this high. A guy brought like a rolling toolbox. So it was about this high. And I'm staying on it. I'm 5'7", so I'm up at almost another foot. And this guy was looking right into my eyes, right, about this far away. Big guy without standing on a box. I'm standing on a box. I'm looking right at him. So he didn't do anything, but it was just
intimidating.
Yeah, it's just an intimidation thing.
So with the Woodstock Square, would you have to have some kind of a permit?
No. They would probably say that, but no, you can't use amplification.
Okay.
And you're in a public area. So not really, no, they can't really stop it. It gets into the free speech laws and all these kind of things. Now, that doesn't mean a cop might not be called and that they might come tell you have to stop and everything. And it gets into, should I stop? What's the situation? All those kind of things.
Well, what you can do is ask the crowd.
Yeah. Right. Most of the, sometimes depending on what's going on, sometimes, they're the ones that call. It all depends, So
I've heard the term coined before. They're called apatheists. They're apathetic and they don't really care if God exists or not.
Right. Yeah.
Have you ever run into something like that?
Yes.
Does God exist?
It's annoying, it's kind of an annoying. So what we do with that, Jolie Brian told me this. He says the sound waves are still hitting their eardrums, so you just talk, so if they're not going to listen. I mean, so they're listening, they can't help but to listen. So if they're standing there and I don't care, well, you just keep telling them,
So you think maybe a strategy might to say, kind of point out that their worldview does have a consequence. If they're right, their lives have no meaning, no value, no purpose.
Yeah. You're free to say whatever you want with someone like that. You could go right down that line like that.
Yeah. You're just a accident on a speck of dust in the universe. And
right.
you don't really matter.
Yeah, nothing matters then.
Yeah,
Nothing.
nothing matters.
Yeah. So you can, so that's what we do with that, depending, you know, a person on the case as well, you know.
Mhm.
So yeah, you do run that, not too often, but you do.
Maybe they're just lazy atheists. They just don't
Yeah.
want to think about it. and-
Well, you know what? Sometimes I ran into a group one time a couple of years ago, and these guys didn't work, and they're just kind of living together, no jobs, hanging out, smoking cigarettes in the square, you know, and they were really offensive at first. I had Frank with me, my son, and I started off just passing out tracts like, "What's this?" you know, and everything. And so, what are you, some kind of a priest or something? I said, "No, I'm a construction worker." You know, so that kind of changed the tone a little bit. That what's this construction worker doing this on his free time, you know?
Mhm.
So then we got chatting and things like that. And then I presented, you know, went through the law and the gospel with them. And, you know, one guy was still offended and upset, you know, and he kind of stood off. But the other three guys talked for a long time, and they thanked me for the conversation afterwards. I asked them, like, what do you guys do? What do you guys do? Oh, nothing really. We're just kind of hanging out, you know. And so I got to talk to him a little bit about that too, about, you know, it's time to start getting with it. You know, you're guys, you're grown men, you know. And the guy thanked me for that too. It's like, they're not being told these things, you know.
You must see a lot of substance abuse and alcohol.
Yes, there's a homeless group in the
Homelessness.
Woodstock area, the Woodstock Square area you'll run into occasionally.
Mhm.
Not, you won't run into the whole group, you'll run into individuals,
Yeah.
you know. So same thing, you try to witness them, talk to them. A lot of them have actually heard quite a bit of
Yeah.
the gospel and everything from all the different ministries that pass out food and
Yeah.
stuff. Some of them are almost, I don't want to say they're immune to it, because no one's totally immune to the gospel, right? But they've heard it. I mean,
Yeah. I've
God's
run
just got to work on them.
I've run into people like that, and they know the Christianese, and
Yeah.
they can, you know, just talk to you just to manipulate you for some money or something.
Right. Yeah.
So they know exactly what to say. To
Yeah.
make it build up your ego a little bit.
Yeah.
Make you think you're doing something good, but
Yeah, they can. Yeah, there's all
but
kinds
maybe
of
it's
ploys.
a seed, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe
You still,
something will catch.
yeah, you still do it, you know.
So speaking of that, we don't know the hearts of man. We don't know who's really, you know, going to accept the Lord. How effective do you think that ministry is?
So I think it's very effective, because in God's economy, there's nothing wasted.
Okay.
So I think it's very effective in that standpoint. And it's as biblical as it can be. God told us to go and spread his word, and as you go, right? So whether you're at work or you're at home, or not every encounter, and this is something I've learned over time too, the kind of the dry season, working through the seasons, you know, it's amazing all the parables that God used with the farming and seasons and all these kind of things. And we have these times that are very fruitful. So for example, so when I went out to California and met with Ray, so Tony and I were really doing a lot of evangelism, everything out in the square, a lot of good conversations, a lot of good, you know, ministry.
Mhm.
And then we went out to California, we learned all that, we came back, we were still doing a lot. And then COVID came.
Mm.
So that slowed a lot of that down.
Yeah.
And then, so we had this peak, right? So we had all this fruitfulness with praying with people, talking to people, a variety of things, watering, planting, all those kind of things, but good, you know. And then it started drying out a little bit with COVID and all that. But my friend, who was a Jehovah's Witness that I was talking to and working on at work, we were over 3 years of conversations, became a Christian.
Wow.
He was a Jehovah's Witness. And he's full on. I mean, what's really cool about people that come out of cults is they, a lot of times, are really, really good with evangelism and all that, because they see yeah. And I mean, we all see it, but I mean, it's just something special about coming out of something where they were believing we all believe lies at that state, right? Before we're Christians, but you know what I mean? But
They have a
natural special kind of
antenna that goes up.
Yes,
and they can
exactly.
Spot a cult a mile away.
Yeah. And they're a lot of times they're very bold.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of times they're very bold. They have conversations and things just right in a lunchroom or something, where a lot of people wouldn't do that, you know, where there's other people around and everything. They don't even care. So that's good. So we had this peak. So I kind of peaked you know, in my view, you know, kind of peaked at that time, this fruitfulness period, harvest period, so to speak. And then COVID and all that came, he converted, and then it kind of dried out for a little while. And there was small things here and there, but we have to learn to be in the dry seasons too, and to be faithful and to keep passing out tracts or even just leaving tracts somewhere.
Mhm.
You know, and you might not be getting the same conversations and opportunities that you were, you know, a year ago or something. And especially when we're not full-time evangelists in terms of like that we do it for a living, like a Ray Comfort or Todd Friel or something, that, you know, we're always, the antenna's always up, but, you know, and you know, the scripture where it talks about being ready in and out of season, that really comes, you know, I mean, I feel like I was in Peoria a couple weeks ago, and this guy came up and talked to me, a homeless guy, you know, and I was super tired from work and everything. And that was a great opportunity to witness, and I blew it. I mean, I didn't even, you know, it didn't even occur to me, you know, it didn't even occur to me for some reason until, you know, I got in the hotel. I'm like, man, I had all kinds of time. I'm out here doing nothing. You know, I'm working, and then I got nothing. Just, you know, I could have talked to him for an hour and I just blew it. Yeah, I just blew it. But I mean, but I mean, I could have done something. So we do need to be ready in season and out of season. You know, I'm in kind of an out of season mode right now, but God still does bring you people and opportunities to even pass. Even I could have even gave him a tract. But, you know, if I give him $5, I could have said, well, here's $1 million in 5, you know, and give him $1 million, you know. So
it sounds like you don't think we should be overly concerned at how effective we are, but just keep on plugging away.
Yeah.
Even in the dry season.
Yeah. And I just overall in our Christian lives too, right? We have all this, the world is kind of, well, at least America, the world's kind of turning against Christianity, that, you know, we kind of see you know, you have politicians even coming out now saying the fundamentalist Christians are the ones that are taking away your abortion rights and doing these things, right? You didn't usually see that before. Now you're starting to see the naming of who the enemy is, right?
You see it in Canada a lot.
Yeah, you do. You're right. Yeah. So all the more reason to continue just as the Bible tells us to, you know, living faithfully and witnessing and all those things. It doesn't change whether it's a fruitful season or a dry season, or, you know, and that's why, and I remember reading this evangelist book a long time ago. I think it was called The One Thing You Can't Do in Heaven was the name of it. And he had all kinds of different ideas, you know, go out with a clipboard or a questionnaire, or like Ray, go out with a video camera and a microphone, because people are just drawn to being interviewed, things like that, even though it's not, it's going on a YouTube channel or something, but they're drawn to that, you know. It feeds their ego a little bit, I guess, famous. You know. Yeah, right.
Of fame,
huh? Yeah. So anyway, so he had a lot. He talked about how, you know, it's always a win. It's always a win for the Christian. If you're rejected, Jesus says, if you're blessed, if you're rejected for my name, that's a blessing.
Yeah.
So that's a win. If you plant a seed and you had a good conversation, that's a win. And if they get converted by God, not you, you're just an instrument at the moment, that's a win too. So it's win, win, and win.
And even when you blow it, you can kind of say, well, I'm not going to do that again.
Right. And you're going to learn from it. Right. Yeah. So it helps take some of the fear away too, with these things, you know, and like, even like someone's experiences, Ray or like Todd Friel, they say they always have a little bit of trepidation every time they get on the box or every time they go out and talk to people, because you really don't know what's going to happen. Every person's different. Right. So it's always a little bit of an adventure, you know.
Butterflies before the game.
Yeah. Yeah, that is. Yeah, very common for me too. I mean, it happens to me. So every time in his providence, right, he may have you arguing with me and saying all kinds of things and asking all kinds of questions and things. And I'm actually answering this guy's question over here, right? His stumbling block or whatever. And God uses that to save this person over here. So yeah, so when they do open air preaching, the heckler's there they're addressing the heckler, not so much for the heckler, but for the audience, for the rest of the crowd. It's actually very effective. It's just, it takes a lot to put together. So I wouldn't, you know, like I say, I would have a team to do it today, because just so much. And then, you know, now, you know, with Antifa type people and things like that, you might get you know, even when we were doing it, they taught us that, you know, you always had something behind your back. You're up against a post, you know, you had a post behind you or a tree or in the one square we were at, they had like a statue, like a big statue kind of a thing. It was like a monument marker or something, and that was behind the people.
So nobody can
Just
sneak
because,
up
yeah,
on you.
because you just can't see it coming. Yeah.
See,
Yeah, William Lane Craig, when he debates people on college campuses, he never expects to convert the person he's debating.
Right. Yeah.
It's the audience.
Yeah,
Those are the
exactly.
people he's really talking to.
Yeah, right.
Making it, logical and reasonable to,
Mhm.
at least have Christianity as an option.
Right.
Because in our culture, and it's getting worse and worse, the gospel doesn't even get a fair hearing.
Right.
Because you might as well be asking somebody to believe in the Easter Bunny.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's how our culture is going. So
It is. Yeah.
in the arena of ideas, his project is to make it okay to believe, make it a viable option to believe.
Right. Right.
And let the person, weigh the evidence out for themselves.
Yeah.
And be drawn by the Holy Spirit if that's the case.
Right. And that's effective, right? You see on his, you'll see all the time on his emails, where
Question of the
someone,
week.
yeah, and people say that they got saved from listening to a podcast or a presentation at college, things like that.
is it-
Yeah, I really got hooked on the one that he did at Willow Creek. I just found it on the YouTube one day, and man, I was hooked.
Yeah.
This apologetic stuff is cool.
Yeah. Well, when I first found William Lane Craig, I was at a Moody Men's Conference.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Erwin Lutzer was there, Ravi Zacharias back then, and William Lane Craig and Phil Johnson doing the molecules to man, kind of going against that deal. He wrote a book too. And it was really good. And that's why I first heard of William Lane Craig. He did the resurrection. He's really good, he's really good on the evidence and all that for the resurrection. That was the first time that I had heard apologetics. Excuse me.
When it comes to evangelism, some say evangelism is an art in that the more you do it, the better you become at it. Do you
Yeah,
think
that's
true.
Yeah. Yeah. Just like any skill. And in the comfort level,
Mhm.
You do get, even though you still can have nervous or butterflies, you do get more comfortable with it. It's kind of like public speaking. The more you do public speaking, well, when you do preaching, you do it once a year. It's
I never
like,
get used to it.
right. Well, because it's once a year,
Right.
but if you were to do it, once a month,
Yeah.
the fourth or fifth time, you'd still have butterflies, but you'd know how to handle them, and it'd be a lot more comfortable. I know times where I've been in public more, preaching here or speaking or presenting something or whatever, something for work, and then you don't do it for a while, and then you got to do it. It's like, wow, I can't believe how nervous I am.
Well, in that same vein, do you think some people are called to be evangelists? They have a special gift for that?
Yeah.
Or do you think evangelists are more like apologists, that everybody's called to do
Well,
it?
so I think everybody's called to do it, but I do think that there's people that have a special gifting for it.
Okay. So
Yeah.
we're all called to be witnesses.
Yeah.
But some people are just have a drive, if not an actual talent for doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those people would be a little bit more outgoing and
Right. There was a guy I was talking to, Horatio Christie, and he was talking about how they have different, apologetics and things like, they use a lot of apologetics, all that, talking to the college kids.
Mhm.
And one guy talked about how there's the one guy, he's basically he's the reaper, and he says he'll have one kid in a month that'll convert or go through enough where he accepts the gospel, say, right? Something
Mhm.
like that. As far as you can tell, converts, right?
Right.
And he says, and this other guy is like 3 a day, and they're doing a very similar things. They're using the same strategies and all that. It's just something about it's the gifting,
Yeah. Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. God's working through this guy as a gift, right? Yeah.
when you're out there, do you like to defend secondary issues like the age of the earth or different systems of soteriology or the meaning of the millennium? Do you like to defend stuff like that, or would you rather go to the things about Christianity that all Christians will believe?
So if it's truly, and it's rare to have a conversation that deep, it's
Okay.
pretty rare. It's pretty rare to have a conversation that deep. But if so, I do like talking about secondary issues, especially if it's something they're curious about. So it's another one of these. Is this a real question, or is it, an attack, or what is it? So if it's a real question, I don't mind talking about it, but won't sit there and just argue with that. We'll use that as a part of the conversation, kind of warming each other up for kind of moving forward, and then to the moral. Always going to the moral for us, always. Tony and I, that's what we're always doing, that going to that moral law.
That's where the conscience is.
Yeah. Always trying to get to the conscience. So we'll answer questions. We'll do things like that. And then it's, within 5-10 minutes trying to get, when we were in training, they tried to tell you that, try to have it so that you can present the law and the gospel in 5 minutes. More so for, like, say, open air preaching, to be able to get that out, because most people walking by, that's what they'll give you. And even in the park, depending on the person's patience level, 5-10 minutes is all you're going to get. So if you get a conversation like that, it's rare. They do happen though. Yeah, they do happen. And it's nice because then you actually get to talk about some of those things. And so, yeah, but we're just trying to get too far out in it, because it just doesn't. So say you, and I've had this happen too, just as experience, just because, you're practicing every time you're out there too, you're always learning. And there's times where, I had a real good conversation about the difference between Catholicism and Protestant, but didn't get anywhere with the law or the gospel or anything. Just had a really interesting conversation about religion. So, I mean, was the seed even planted in that? I don't,
I see. So if a person says, I'm thinking about Christianity, but I just can't seem to get by the fact that the evidence of scientific evidence doesn't really look like the earth was created in 6 days.
Yeah.
Would you try to explain how the Bible does teach that? Or would you say, something? A lot of smart Christians don't believe that.
Yeah. Well,
don't let that be a stumbling block.
Yeah. So I'll say my position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You'll give your own.
Yeah. I'll give my own position, my view and everything. And then, and say where I get that from scripture, and then try to move to the moral stuff. So I'll try to answer it and then move. I'm not really there to, because those are intramural, right? Those are intramural. If you and I want to talk, I'm a young earth creationist. Issue. Yeah. I'm a young earth creationist. I don't think you are, right? You're not a young earth creationist, right?
I'm open to it, but I'm leaning toward 13.7 billion year old universe.
So we could have, you and I could have a conversation. We could take out different evidences and things like that and have a real good conversation with it. And especially some of these issues take more, they're not 5-minute conversations. I mean, you're just getting started, especially with something like that. Or
for me, the most important thing is the resurrection. That's where I always go.
Yeah.
The evidence for the resurrection and all the rest of it, the age of the earth. Yeah. If I'm wrong on that, I don't care.
Right. And so we do talk, you do end up with resurrection questions or things that you do use the apologetics. So it's not like you're not using any of these, you're using them all the time.
Right.
It's just you're not staying there for too long.
Right.
And you can always come back around to it too. So I mean, if that really was a question as you got through it, there's no rule or that you have to move on. I mean, you could stay there and talk about it still.
Yeah.
It's really it's one of those things where it's really gauging in the moment. I had a guy at work that really was he says, okay, he was a Catholic guy. And he says, I've always wondered about this all these years. Where do cavemen and dinosaurs fit in with the Bible? Where do cavemen and dinosaurs fit in? And so I talked to him about it. I was able to talk to him about all that. He'd never heard an answer for it. He always had people kind of dodge it. And that's what I mean about some of these churches, they're not teaching their people a lot of these things. And, I've run into people that, that have been in the church or a cultural Christian that didn't know Jesus was sinless. How do you go to church and never hear that?
Or know that he was God.
Right. Things like that, it's amazing what I've been shocked overall through all these things is how many people that I meet that have been in a youth group or at a church to even to some level. I mean, we're not talking about they went one time or something, but went through their 8th grade or whatever and don't know basic stuff. The
incarnation. Atonement.
Yeah.
Trinity.
Right. Resurrection, all those things that like you say that Jesus is God, that he claimed to be God, that he was crucified for claiming to be God, all these kind of things, just no idea.
Wow. Well, that's on us.
It is. Yeah.
That's on us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's on the American church. You know, the American church has got a lot of repenting to do. You know?
Yeah. We got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
So I can see we're over an hour now. Any closing thoughts or advice you'd give the budding evangelist?
So yeah, because I wasn't too long ago, I was a budding evangelist. So just to keep at it, to, you know, remember to pray, remember to be in your Bible every day, you know, to not lose heart. You know, what Ray says is to have love, let your love compel you to overcome fear. When I first started passing out tracts and things, was when the first time I passed out tracts publicly, instead of just leaving them somewhere, you know, publicly, was when the Da Vinci Code movie came out.
Oh, wow.
And I went to the movie theater and I had these tracts made by InterVarsity Press. Came out with these real nice booklets that went into history and talked about the movie. And that was really, really well done. I wish I had one of them still, but I gave them all away. We had hundreds. I had 500 of them and gave them all away.
Wow.
No, you don't have one.
I don't have one, but that was kind of like what got me really going. It was like, wow, people are really interested in this.
Yeah, they're
And,
at the movie, you know?
Right. Yeah. And they were, when people were shaken up from that, you know, people came out and they were shaken up from is what I believed all this science. And they took that like I was like I was passing out dollar bills. It really was. I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
Yeah. But I got to tell you, when I first pulled into that parking lot with my box, I had to pray. I was really, really nervous. This is just passing out tracts. I was really, really nervous. And I'm praying like, God, help me. I don't, you know, and then as soon as I stood out of the car with my box, the fear went away.
Wow.
You know, and I went down there and, you know, I didn't die.
The magic bar.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, and so I don't get nervous at all passing out tracts now, you know, just going out handing things out. It's no big deal at all. But man, I was, you know, and I got mocked a little bit, you know, for some of that, but still, I mean, it was fine. But, you know, most of the time, you know, the worst you're going to get is maybe embarrassed, especially in our country, you know. You know, it's rare, you know, once in a while people get attacked or something. It was pretty rare, you know.
You weren't shipwrecked.
Right. Yeah. I wasn't hit with
Rocks and stones.
cat of nine tails, you know,
Right.
39 times, so things like that. So, you know, and even if those days do come, we still need to be about our Lord's work, you know. Yeah. So.
Well, listen, I really want to thank you for coming
Yeah,
in,
thanks for
taking your
having me.
night
Yeah.
off and coming in and talk to us. And
Yeah, it was good. Thanks for having me.
thanks, Jim, for your input.
Yeah.